This is Warriors Sound Live.
Here comes Curry. Step back off the dribble three. Are you kidding me?
Here's Laurence Scott.
Thank you. The NBA restart heading into weekend number 2 in Orlando. This edition of Warriors Sound, another look inside the bubble as we look at the weekend ahead with Warriors broadcaster Tim Roye. Several intriguing matchups with playoffs positioning at stake. Saturday, Utah and Denver. Part of the early action is we think back to what was the Warriors' final road game of the season, a win in Denver.
Now let me be the first. We can correctly now say there has been an upset in the Colorado primary. The Golden State Warriors have knocked off the Denver Nuggets 116-100.
And Tim, former Warriors assistant Michael Malone's squad getting all kinds of contributions these days, especially from young players like Michael Porter Jr.
There's no doubt that Michael Porter Jr. is a big key to their future. Let's go back to when they drafted him, and there were, question marks about his back and his health. They had to wait on him for a year, and I think that they really just think that he's a player that's just going to get better and better and better. He's had back-to-back 30-point games. He looks like he fits around Jokic, and I think he's going to be a player that everybody in the West has to be wary of for the years to come, because Jokic is such a good passer. The other day, Greg Popovich compared him to Larry Bird, and with that, and when you have a guy that can finish around the rim like Porter can and has that athletic ability, if you have an unselfish guy that the offense goes through, Porter's going to get easy baskets. So it's really a great situation right now for Denver. I think they're finding out a little bit more about their team, even with the injuries they have in the guard line.
As we talk about the restart in Orlando, we do think back to that Warriors-Denver game, and this was one of those moments worth noting here.
Here's Morris, gets it over to Porter Jr., who's on the floor for the first time. Takes a three off the dribble, knocked it down. When he plays well, they win.
Yeah, you said it then, and this was Porter Jr. after the Nuggets' victory over the Spurs in Orlando.
Not every game is going to be a 30-point, 15-rebound game, especially with all the talent we have on this team. Anybody can go off at any night, but for me, it's getting that routine down, making sure every single day I'm staying consistent in that, just to come out with that mindset of energy. So that's a preset thing I got to do every single game. These games get long and the season gets long, but the great ones can be consistent with it and do it on a nightly basis. So that's my next step.
And this Mike Malone from Inside the Bubble on Porter Jr.
To follow up a really good game against Oklahoma City with a performance of 30 and 15 shows you the kind of talent he has and his understanding of I have to bring it every night. Great players bring it every single night. And there's so much room for growth. That's the scary part.
So this Utah-Denver game on Saturday, really a big thing when it comes to positioning in the Western Conference playoffs race, Tim.
Well, it is, because Utah is hanging on to four for dear life. They have Oklahoma City and Houston in a tie right behind them, a half game back heading into weekend play. And so, they've got all these teams clustered together. Denver could even pass the Clippers if they have a strong week, a good weekend. But that game between Utah and Denver, that's not only a game for position, but it's also a potential first round matchup. They could face each other if Denver were to lose a couple of games and get down into that soup that is the middle of the Western Conference. So it's a very important game, and I think both these teams are looking at the fact that they would like to stay toward the top of the bracket as opposed to the bottom. And again, the first round, with it being on a bubble, there's going to be no home court, but there is going to be matchups, and we know the playoffs are all about matchups. I really wanted to say one thing about Michael Porter Jr., if I may, and that is listening to his comments after the game the other night. Couldn't you just hear Michael Malone's voice? So it tells me that Malone and Porter, even though Porter is a young kid, and I used to tell my kids, you don't know what you don't know, and Porter Jr.'s in that same category. He's just starting to figure it out. And you could hear the encouragement from Michael Malone in Porter's answer, but you could also hear the wisdom and the tale that, hey, you can have a good night, but it's about being consistent every night, and that's going to serve him well.
Yeah, I remember seeing Michael Porter Jr. between his sophomore and junior years in high school when he was part of Stephen Curry's Under Armour select camps, and you could tell he was going to be a real force to come. You know, also on Saturday, Tim, we're seeing the LA teams in action, the Clippers and the Blazers, plus the Lakers facing the Pacers on TNT in the afternoon. What Lakers team do you think we see this weekend? It's becoming something of a question as they've locked up the number 1 seed and they are basically playing out the string.
I think they want to keep their rhythm. I think they want to stay engaged in this process. So I don't think you'll see guys sitting out a great deal of time. I think you'll see some minutes maybe monitored. But I think because of the fact that they're playing so few games leading into the playoffs, I don't think you'll see a guy get tremendous rest. I could be totally off base on this, but I do think that the danger of resting people in a situation like this and not playing them in games leading up to the playoffs is that you might encourage some rust. You might get a little bit out of rhythm. So I think the teams that are locked up, even maybe going over to the Eastern Conference and taking a look at, Milwaukee and Toronto, I think as the week continues from this weekend into next weekend, heading into the games, I think those star players may play a little bit more to make sure they're on high gear. So I think the Lakers will come out and start this process, and I think they'll start this weekend of ramping up into the postseason. Now let me get back to Portland for 1 second, because Portland right now is right behind Memphis for the 8th spot. And Memphis, I think, is showing the fact that they're a very young team. They've had trouble getting going in this series here. And Portland, meanwhile, is, even though their record is not the best in the bubble, but they're playing good basketball. And I'm wondering, if you're the Lakers, Laurence, and you're looking at a first-round matchup, now that Nurkic and Collins are both back for Portland, that gives them size, plus the firepower of their backcourt. Is that a team the Lakers really want to play in the first round? I'm not saying Portland would beat them, but that would not be your typical 1-8 matchup.
Yeah, I hear that. And that does become very, very interesting as that 8-9 battle does shape up. And you're talking about a team that came into the bubble but is kind of also playing out the string. It's the Phoenix Suns getting good experience facing Miami on Saturday. And it brings us back to this fantastic finish in the bubble, time expiring, Devin Booker capping a 35-point performance and a Suns win over the Clippers as heard on the Suns radio network with the legend Al McCoy on the call.
Booker waiting with it. He's way out on the perimeter now. Booker lobs it for Ayton. Ayton looks, goes over to Rubio. Rubio on the drive. Waits, shoots. The shot is not good. Rebound Zubats. He loses it. Suns get it back to Rubio. Time, 6 seconds left in the game. Out to Booker. 5 seconds, 4 seconds. Booker on the drive. Goes up. Here's the shot. Shoot! He got it! He got it! And the Suns win the game. Devin Booker at the buzzer puts it up and puts it in. Oh, brother. D. Booker doing his thing at the right time.
2 things of greatness, Tim. A buzzer beater and Al McCoy.
Yeah, it doesn't get any better than Al McCoy. He is the dean of NBA announcers, and it's great to see him having such good calls at this point of the season. And you mentioned the Suns getting experience. They've got Devin Booker, they've got some talent there, and as you look at the standings, they're not that far out. But I think you're right, though. I think they're going to run out of time. I think if we had another 10 games or so, or even another 5 or 6 games added on to this play-in, I think they would have a chance.
Tim, next week we'll be back to go through what we saw during the weekend and continue looking forward toward the playoffs. With Tim Roye, I'm Laurence Scott. This is Warrior Sound.
This This has been Warriors Sound Live.
Right side three. Got